Back in the 1980s, in the small town where I lived, there wasn't really a lot to do. A group of us kids formed, and we would make our own adventures every weekend. I was around 15 years old at the time, and the 7 other kids that I hung out with were around the same age. One weekend, we all met up at a nature trail to just walk and joke around. As we were walking along the trail, somebody mentioned that there was an abandoned honor farm not too far from where we were. An honor farm is basically like a prison farm where inmates would live and work. We all thought that it was a good idea to go there and check out this scary and mysterious abandoned building. We walked for about a mile when we reached it. We had heard stories of scary stuff that had happened to other people at the honor farm, and therefore I was excited to explore it, as some lore had been built around it in our town. We arrived at the notorious building, and we all ran inside and split up as we explored it. My very best friend and I headed up the concrete stairway to the second floor. When we were inside, we noticed that there was graffiti splattered all over the walls, so we knew that many other people had also been there exploring. We came to this one room that was completely dark, and we stood outside the doorway because we were too afraid to go in. At this point, 2 other guys from the group showed up, and we dared them to go in. One of the guys looked at us and rolled his eyes, and then just walked into the room as he felt along the wall to guide him. He was in the room for what seemed like a few minutes. Suddenly, he jumped out with a scary boo as we all jumped backwards and then laughed at what he had done. At that moment, he looked down at his hands, and they were covered in what looked like blood from when he dragged his hand on the wall to enter the room. "It's probably red paint," I said, but I saw that he appeared scared, and I suggested that we go back down to the first floor. All 4 of us ran back down the stairs, and we met the others in the hallway right off the staircase. One of the guys in the group was a joker. We all told him about the red gunk on the guy's hands from that room in the second floor, and he started to joke about it as we all laughed. As everybody was standing there and listening to the guys joke around, I turned towards the main foyer that was just feet away from where we were standing. As I looked, I suddenly saw a man walking through the foyer. He walked at an angle, sort of left to right with confident strides. He was very tall, and he didn't even turn and look at us. He was wearing a long overcoat that had a hood that was pulled up over his head. He was well dressed and wearing nice shoes. I don't remember why I noticed his shoes, but I took note of them. He just walked from where I could see him, and then he was out of my view. I interrupted the guy who was talking, and I told him what I had just seen. Everybody then looked in that direction, but nobody could see the man. We all decided that we should leave, and we started heading back to the area where we had been dropped off by our parents. As we walked, we forgot all about the possible blood on the one guy's hands and the man that I had seen. We were just joking around and having fun as we walked back. That night, I spent the night at my friend's house. They had a rabbit pen in their backyard with several adorable rabbits that my friend's mother had taken in and fed after they were abandoned as babies. The next morning, we got up and went into the kitchen where my friend's dad told us not to go out into the backyard. We pressed him as to why we couldn't go back there, and he told us that somebody had come into their yard that night and cut off the heads of all the rabbits. He said the strangest part was that there was no blood at all. It was almost as if somebody drank the blood right after chopping their heads off. Right away, I knew that somebody had followed us from the honor farm, and that same person, or whatever I had seen, had been the one who had killed the rabbits like that. Something was seriously up with that place. It has since been torn down, and nothing remains of that old building. There were so many scary stories coming out of that place that the city decided to level it. After experiencing it myself, I believed that all the stories I had heard about the abandoned honor farm were most likely true, and that there had been some sort of pure evil associated with that building. When I was a teenager, my friends and I used to quite frequently go to abandoned buildings of different sorts. This hobby got worn out for me personally, but when I was at my first or second year of university, I noticed a weird, not too big abandoned building very close to the university. My university is located pretty much downtown. The specific area is very crowded and filled with elite properties, stores, and historic buildings. So it was weird seeing the abandoned building standing weirdly in some sort of yard or courtyard between other buildings. I grabbed my friends, there were 4 of us, and we decided to check it out. We went there late at night so there would not be any more eyes on us than necessary, and it was also winter. We grabbed our tools and broke a lock to one of the entrances, but it was a dead-end small room. It was creepy with a wheelchair standing there. We then found another door to the building. It was locked more heavily, we could not break the lock itself, so we somehow managed to make a big hole in the door so everybody could just climb in there. It was very loud obviously, so after we did it, we decided to wait a bit before going inside in case somebody had called the cops on us. After an hour spent at the nearby McDonald's, proud of how we had handled that super locked door that seemed to haven't been open for years, we decided to go in. The building felt empty and damaged, and there was not much stuff in there besides concrete walls and a lot of trash which we thought was old. There was no light in there at all, as every window was blocked off and locked also. It's creepy to think back on this decision, but the first thing that we decided to do was to go to the attic, all of us. It was more of the same, a lot of trash, some graffiti, and generally nothing too interesting. Then we decided to come back to the floor we started from and check it out properly. While we were there, one of us decided to go across the hall, and we could see him clearly with a flashlight, checking out some sort of shack that was located by some piles of trash at the end of the hallway. He looked inside and then rushed back to us, very concerned. He said that there was a body inside. We all thought that it was a dead person because the building was locked, and we didn't even process that someone could be living there somehow. We felt like somebody had died, and we wondered how we would report it to the police without getting in trouble for breaking into the building. The discussion could not be continued, because then we actually saw someone coming at us, a mere silhouette. We lost our minds from this, and we rushed to our door hole, which was not perfect for anyone to climb through in such a rush. While making it out, this person shouted something angry at us with a rather unsettling voice, and was mad at us for breaking the door. We were all so scared because of how unexpected that was. We all assumed that there could not be anybody locked in an abandoned building that was out of use for so many years and partially damaged. We never thought to ourselves that maybe it was not the city that had locked the building up, but maybe somebody had managed to privatize the locks. A scary experience probably for both our friend group, and I'm assuming the homeless guy who woke up to us right near him, and what we later found out used to be a private hospital. In 2010, when I was 15, I became interested in urban exploration photography. I absolutely loved seeing the beautiful, eerie photos of abandoned shopping centers and hearing about all the awesome vintage stuff people would find at these places. I was originally thinking of going to a famous local abandoned mental asylum. There are many creepy and weird pictures of this place online, and many stories of paranormal stuff happening there. About a week before my best friend Anna and her boyfriend Garrett and I were going to go, I was talking to an acquaintance, Selena, at a party who warned me off. She told me how she and her cousins went there a while back. Nobody else was there that night except them, and apparently they got horrible vibes as soon as they walked in. While they were exploring upstairs, one of her cousins felt an overwhelming force pulling him towards a room. Just before he opened the door, he fell through the floor and slashed one of his wrists very badly and lost a lot of blood. She said she would never go back there, but if I found a cool house to let her know. Because of that story, Anna, Garrett, and I mostly gave up on the idea of urban exploring. I just didn't think about it for ages until I found an abandoned house one day. I was going for a bike ride and decided to take a different route than my normal one. This one ended up running through this weird little pathway at the bottom of a dead-end street. I kept riding down it until I ended up at this park. I had never been there before and was very disoriented at this point. I was basically lost in my own suburb. Anyway, I rode through this park and tried to find a water fountain. I ended up going through this long path which led me to nothing except this high stone wall covered in dead vines. The stonework on the wall was a unique design, and it just seemed odd and out of place, so I felt the urge to see over it. I stood on my bike, and even then, I was only just able to look over this wall. What I saw was a very, very weird mansion. The garden was overgrown, a sea of green weeds broken only by Greek marble statues poking out. The bottom floor windows were all broken, but I could see that there was black and white checkered flooring and more statues inside. The windows at the top floor were boarded up, except for one that had curtains. There was also a fountain in the garden that was all cracked too. It was the oddest and most out-of-place house I'd ever seen, and my instant urge was to photograph it, but I didn't have my camera or my phone. So I rode back through the park and picked a house number to remember, and managed to make my way back home, even though I got really, really lost. I instant messaged Anna and Garrett, as well as Selena, the girl I met at the party. I told them I found this incredible abandoned house and we needed to check it out. My best friend immediately got super excited, because the plan was we were going to start a blog and she would write about places we explored and I would take the photos, and her boyfriend was excited because he was super into horror movies and wanted to film stuff. Selena was a bit reluctant. She said that the statues sounded kind of creepy, but eventually she decided she would come. We planned to go on a Saturday night because Garrett wanted to film at night, and we were all scared of being seen by people in the park, so it seemed logical. We met at Anna's house, and Garrett brought his dad's trailer to bring a ladder so we could get over the wall. I was nervous because it hit me that we were breaking in and trespassing, and if we got caught, my parents would flip out and never let me go out again. So we left Anna's house at midnight and made it smoothly to the house number I'd remembered. This is where we encountered our first problem, because I led us down the wrong street, and it took us a half an hour to find the park, and Garrett was carrying this heavy ladder and getting really angry. We finally found the park, and I just remember feeling a bit uneasy. It was very, very dark. No lights in the park or street lights were on, and it was very still and quiet. We found the path and walked down, and sure enough, we reached the wall. We were ages away from the car by now. I had assumed it was quick, but I'd been biking the last time and not carrying a ladder and a camera. We climbed the wall and then sat at the top, pulled the ladder up, and climbed down it into the garden. As soon as we set foot in this garden, I was just filled with dread. I think we all were. The statues were very creepy and human-like. Up close, their faces were just wrong-looking, like features were weird sizes, and they looked really unsettling, like their arms were twisted weirdly. We were completely silent. Garrett was filming, and I was taking pictures. We reached the back door, and it was unlocked. Anna mentioned to us that it was strange that the door was unlocked, and we all agreed, but we went in anyways. Once we stepped inside, we were in this huge empty room filled with objects, clearly statues covered in sheets. Garrett pulled a sheet off one, and we all screamed. It was a Greek statue with a horrible human-like face painted on, grimacing. Selena wanted to leave at this point, and I didn't mind that idea, but Garrett convinced us to check it out a little more. He said that probably other kids had been through there as well, exploring the unlocked area and painted on the statue. We weren't going to split up and walk back through the garden alone, so we continued. We kept walking through the house, and I was shaking too much to take pictures. We passed empty room after empty room, all filled with sheet-covered statues. We reached the bottom of a marble staircase. Once we got to the top of the staircase, it was clear that something was very, very wrong with the house. There were no doors except for one at the end of a hallway, but every room was filled with odd, wrong-looking furniture. Chairs were painted red in a pile in one room, and tables that were too high and painted odd colors as well. Something was really off. We opened a cupboard in one room and screamed at a horrific life-size mural of some sort of bizarre person with inhumanly long teeth and hands. At this point, even Garrett was freaking out. He was like, let's just check out the last room and then get out. So we all walked slowly towards the door. Inside was a nursery which had a black crib with old wooden toys. I can't recall what the toys were, maybe puppets. There were strange paintings of horrifying clowns like the other mural we had seen earlier. We didn't even step inside the room. Garrett said that we should leave right now and that the place wasn't safe. As soon as we all got downstairs again, we froze because one of the statues had moved up against the wall. We dropped our stuff and ran to the door. Garrett had to kick the door open because somehow it was locked now, and we ran through the horrible garden to the wall. I remember that when I was nearly at the wall, Selena just screamed, and we all turned to see a light was now on in the nursery room. We scaled the wall and jumped down, not even bothering to grab the ladder. I sprained my ankle on the jump, but I didn't look back as we all ran through the park. We got into the car, and everyone was crying and covered in cuts and scratches, and my ankle was swelling already. Selena already didn't know us that well, and after that night, she deleted us all off Facebook, and I never saw her again. I had horrible nightmares for a month afterwards, and my ankle has never been the same. Honestly, I feel like we were in the presence of someone or something very evil. This was a creepy encounter I had a few years ago. A couple of years ago, my buddy and I were bored one afternoon, and we decided to explore an abandoned house that I had spotted earlier that week when I was out on a drive. We live in a town that's mostly suburbs, but if you drive 5 minutes north, it's all country roads, farmland, and forest. The abandoned house I spotted was in the middle of a field. There wasn't a paved road or gravel driveway that led up to it, so we parked as close as we could on the side of the road and walked through the tall grass to reach it. The house looked very old, most likely built in the early 1900s. There were plants engulfing the entire home, and part of the roof was missing from what looked like fire damage. It had obviously been abandoned for some time. My friend told me that he was going to hang back when we came close to the house. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and he said that he was getting bad vibes. I decided to keep going though, because I already walked out to it and I wanted to see it. When I reached the house, I looked in through the windows and saw lots of weather damage and signs of neglect. The door, however, was locked. I walked around the perimeter of the house and found a cellar door unlocked. I entered and slowly started walking down an old wooden staircase. I got about halfway down and squinted, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. The only light source was the sunlight coming in from the open cellar door. It was full of old belongings, furniture, and junk. Then, in the far right corner, I saw what looked like a figure standing in the darkness facing me. I had a terrible feeling. It was a tall person just standing there straight with their arms at their side. I couldn't make out what they were wearing or any facial features. I stood there for a few seconds staring back at them in shock. I thought that they had to be playing mind tricks on me. I squinted harder, trying to make out if what I was seeing was actually a tall figure, when it suddenly moved slightly and made a deep grunting sound. I panicked and ran up the stairs as fast as I could. When my friend saw the look on my face when I exited the basement, he started running towards the car. He said it looked like I had seen a ghost. When we drove away, I kept looking back to see if we were being followed, but nobody was there. I haven't been back since. Back when I was in my early to mid-teens, around 2007 or 2008, a bunch of friends and I would regularly hang out at an old abandoned school. It was a very small school with only 8 classrooms, a teacher's room, a cafeteria, and 2 bathrooms, and there was also one room that we had no idea what it was since it was always locked. The school hadn't been able to keep up with the growing town and the large number of newcomers that followed with it. The school was closed in favor of a newer and bigger school building by the end of the 1980s. Most of the place was boarded up completely, but you could enter through a window in one of the classrooms where the board had been ripped down. Our routine was always the same. Whoever of us got off school first would go down to the building and go through the different rooms to make sure that everything was empty and safe. The building had earlier been known as a local spot for drug addicts, and used needles was such a common sight for us at this point. So this one day, my friend and I were the first to get out of school, and per usual we took the walk down to the building. Upon entering and stepping out of the classroom and into the hallway, we immediately saw a large man. I remember him as quite huge, but that might possibly be how he appeared to us as kids. My friend let out a huge scream. The man did not appear shocked or scared. He didn't seem to react to us, but he turned to look at us and then spoke. He said one of our friends' names and asked if we had seen them. We told the guy that we hadn't seen anyone and only just got there, to which he sighed and shrugged. Then he pushed past us to leave the same way we had just entered. Now, our friend has an unusual name, so the chances that this guy was just looking for another random guy who just happened to have the same name were low. None of us had never seen this guy before, and I happened to know most of my said friend's family as well. We both described what the guy looked like to our friend, and he didn't seem to know who this guy could have been either. So for the next few months, we were too scared to go back. We didn't return until about 3 or 4 months later. It was the middle of summer vacation, and we thought that it would be fun to climb up on the roof of the building and sunbathe. Upon climbing it, we found the roof to be rather weak and close to caving in, but something made us take the risk and dare to venture out on the roof after all. There was a hole in the roof, and we figured the hole to be directly above the room that we had never been in. The hole in the roof was only about the size of a football though. One of my friends came up with the idea to lower her arm into the hole and filmed the room using her phone. Then we could see what the room looked like. She put her arm down, and as she was filming, she suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. Then she immediately retracted her arm, without her phone though. She was certain that something had knocked it from her hand. As we looked down through the hole, we could see that her phone was laying on the floor. We climbed down from the roof and entered the building, now intent on doing whatever it took to get in the room. We didn't want our friend to have to return home without a phone and explain what happened to her parents. About 30 minutes later, we finally managed to make a hole in the door, put our hands inside, and open the door from the inside without any trouble. As we stepped inside, we all stared in silence at the room. To this day, I have no idea what this room was doing in a school building, and I sincerely hope that it was never used for what it looked like it was intended for. The room was small, and the floor and walls were solid concrete. In the left corner of the room when we entered, there were 2 metal bowls sitting on the floor, and in the back room there were 5 chains dangling from the wall. 4 of the chains had equal-sized handcuffs on them, and then there was one larger cuff that looked like it would fit around a neck. Needless to say, we swiftly picked up my friend's phone and immediately left the place. However, the room had us both scared and also slightly intrigued, so after some talk back and forth, we decided to go back and look at it again the following day. When we returned the next day, we found the door to be locked once again, and somebody had covered the hole we made in the door with a large wooden board nailed on the door. Once again, we immediately left, and after that visit, we never returned. I have no idea what we stumbled on that day, but I'm certain my days of hanging out at that place is what sparked my interest in abandoned places. Since taking up urban exploring, it's been a dream of mine to go back to that school and check out if that room was still there, but unfortunately the place no longer exists, and the area is now home to a thrift store. I've explored many abandoned buildings over the past 2 years, but the scariest was an abandoned mall I explored once with a friend. It was late at night, and it took some work to get into the shopping center as it was locked up tight. We had to get onto the roof of the mall by going through a multi-story parking ramp that was next to it, also abandoned. There was a 10-foot wall we found and piled random things and debris against the wall so that we could climb over. Once we were in the mall, we did some normal exploration, checking everything out. We had explored almost the entire mall when we went downstairs to the ground floor for the last parts of it. As we walked around, we heard the sound of a radio and saw a light coming from an office. We thought it might be security, so we walked back up to where we had come in on the roof, ready to leave. As we were walking onto the roof, my friend suddenly stopped in our tracks and said that there was a guy blocking our exit up ahead. This guy was wearing all black and had no security badge on, and he hadn't seen us yet. We decided to hide for a bit, waiting for him to leave, thinking he was another explorer just smoking a cigarette or something. However, when we'd come back from our hiding spot a bit later, thinking he was gone by then, he was still there, this time holding a metal pipe. We instantly knew that something was going on here, since he looked at us as if he was guarding the entrance. It seemed like gang activity, and that they might be doing something or maybe hiding something in the building down on the first floor that they didn't want anyone to see. We went back down to the second floor and hid in a display window that was hidden from the rest of the floor. We were there for like 20 minutes at most, but it felt like years, heart pounding the whole time. We heard another man walking around our floor, dragging a piece of metal across the floor. My friend and I had no idea if maybe somebody had seen us walking around, or if they knew that we were in the building. But we didn't want to take any chances since these men looked sketchy. My friend remembered that there was another door on the roof that would bypass the guy guarding the other route and would take us straight into the parking ramp. We decided this was the best plan to get out without anybody noticing. We waited for the guy to leave our floor and decided to make a break for it to find the door. We couldn't rush or run as it would be easy to hear somebody running around in the abandoned mall, so we quietly sneaked around the back rooms until reaching the other door. We found our escape, but it was blocked by debris. We took a risk with the noise at this point and started pulling the debris away from the door, and my friend kicked the door open loudly. We sprinted across the roof, and I have no idea if anyone saw us because I was occupied in getting out there fast. We finally got into the parking ramp and made our way down to the bottom. There we saw there was another presumably gang member sitting in a blacked out Ford Transit van. The engine of the car was on, and I'm guessing the guy was in charge of guarding the entrance to the abandoned parking ramp. Whoever these people were, they clearly did not want anyone entering the abandoned mall. Maybe we just got caught in the mall at the wrong time, but we still weren't going to take any chances. At this point, our only option was to find a fire exit to the outside. The fire exit we found was screwed shut, so I basically launched myself through the door, which luckily flew open, and we got out and climbed down to the main road and onto the street. The only thing I can think of being all coordinated as the guys were and how they were dressed was gang activity. Once again, we had no idea if they originally knew that we were in the mall or not. Probably not, but we didn't want to take any chances with them, especially if they thought we saw something. That day has stuck with me as a scary moment in my life. I'm still exploring, but just being more careful with places I choose to explore. This happened one summer afternoon in 2018 when my partner, my stepdad, and I decided to check out an abandoned factory near my parents' house. We were just picking up my partner when we passed by it, and without thinking much about it, we started talking about exploring the place. My stepdad, who tends to act on impulse like us, pulled over right by the building and we decided to go for it. It didn't take long to find a way inside. The factory was falling apart with broken windows, walls crumbling down, and most of the roof was missing. The only real obstacle was a doorway that had some debris in front of it. We cleared that away, and as soon as we stepped through the door, something felt off. It was the middle of the summer, but the air inside the building was freezing cold. I don't mean it was a little chilly, it felt like winter. It wasn't even a damp kind of cold, like what you would expect from an abandoned building. And anyway, there was enough holes in the walls and roof that it shouldn't have been that cold. The inside was just as trashed as the outside. Piles of broken machinery, rusted metal, and old wooden beams lay scattered around. As we moved farther into the building, my partner and stepdad went ahead to check out another room, and I wandered off by myself to look through some cabinets that had been left behind. It was like everything had just been abandoned overnight. Files, worker IDs, and even older sheets from the late 90s and early 2000s were scattered everywhere. Most of the orders were packed and ready to be shipped, but none of them had ever been sent out. My stepdad pointed out how strange that was, and the factory looked like it had been closed for many decades, even though the most recent date I found was 2002. The building at most had been abandoned for 16 years. I have no expertise in something such as how quickly buildings decay, but the whole place seemed very run down for only 16 years. As we were talking about how weird the place was, I started feeling something else. It wasn't just the cold or the dust or the abandoned vibe. I was getting a feeling of danger, like something was watching us, or maybe waiting for us to leave. I can't describe it any better than that. It was like my fight or flight response kicked in, but I didn't know why. I told my partner and stepdad, and they agreed that we should head out. It was odd, and we hadn't heard anything or seen anything strange, but we all felt it. We made our way back to the car, and just as we were pulling away from the building, my partner and I both noticed something. In the doorway we had just come through, standing there, was a figure. It was hard to make out clearly. It kind of looked human, but not exactly. Something about it didn't sit right. It was like a person, but not. The figure didn't move, as it just stood there, staring at us. My stepdad didn't seem to notice since he was too busy driving. My partner and I looked at each other at the same time and asked if we had seen that thing in the door, so it was definitely not our imagination. We never went back to the factory. I can't shake the feeling whenever I drive past the building to my partner's house. I drive past the abandoned factory so often, and I wish I had never gone inside, because I think about it every time I drive by. About a 30-minute drive from where I live, this big retirement home building has been left abandoned since 2014. I don't know why it was abandoned, but I always thought it would be a cool place to explore. So finally, in 2020, when I was 16 years old, I went to the building with a few friends at night. When we arrived, we started looking around the outside of the building, shining our flashlights at the broken windows and stuff. Suddenly, one of my friends stopped in his steps and said, "I don't think it's a good idea to go inside now," and pointed out two reflecting dots in one of the windows. We still wanted to check out the building, but we decided to come back in the morning since it would be safer during the day. The next morning, when looking through the window where we saw what could have been a pair of eyes, we saw nothing at all that could reflect light. I found this a bit strange, but we were determined to get inside. We found a small open window that we could fit through and went in. It was quite a cool place. There was a lot of graffiti and stuff, and we decided to explore. Eventually, we walked next to the room where we saw the reflecting lights the previous night, and looked around in it, but found nothing. Just a weird bathroom with writing all over the walls in red marker. I found it kind of creepy, but there was graffiti everywhere, so we thought nothing of it. Everything was going smoothly until we were on the highest floor of the building. We were casually walking around through the hallway when one of my friends and I heard voices coming from the floor below us where we had just come from. My friend and I forced the other friends in our group to be quiet, and we all heard some voices that sounded like it came from about 2 or 3 men. We wanted to leave as soon as possible, but the building was designed so that we had to walk down the stairs next to the voices we heard out in the hallway that would lead us to an exit. So we finally walked slowly and silently down the first set of stairs. When we went down in that hallway, we heard voices coming from the room where we had seen the pair of eyes reflecting at night. Once we passed by that room, we sprinted through the rest of the hallway and exited the building. While walking away, we looked back at the room from the outside and saw an old scruffy-looking man waving at us. I didn't go back for a while, but eventually, a new friend I made really wanted to go there, so I reluctantly went with him because I knew the layout of the building, and so they wouldn't have to go alone. So I was back inside the abandoned building again, this time at night. We explored, and after about half an hour we went into the basement and sat down somewhere to smoke. Right when we lit our cigarettes, we heard footsteps above us, and we stayed still from fear because we had just been there talking in the hallway pretty loudly. My first thought was that it was likely the weird scruffy man from last time, because another explorer would have said something to us. The footsteps became louder and closer, but we could not go anywhere because this person was blocking our exit, so we stayed still for what felt like hours. The person just stood at the end of the dark hallway. We eventually saw some light going up and down the hallway after the footsteps went back upstairs. We waited about 5 to 10 minutes before bolting out of there and going into the forest nearby. We didn't talk about it for a month. until I saw on the news that they found someone living in the abandoned building. When police came to arrest him, he started throwing Molotov cocktails at them, so he ended up getting shot and died later in the hospital. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we ever got too close to that man in the multiple times that I explored the building. This happened just a few days ago, and it still terrifies me so much that I can't help but look over my shoulder whenever I'm alone in a room. I work in construction, and I mostly work from the office, but this day we were going out into the field. My team is made up of a few guys and one girl, Jane, who happens to be one of my good friends. A few days ago, we got the chance to check out a building before it was demolished. The place was huge, and we were given strict instructions of no cell phones, no pictures, and no distractions. We had walkie-talkies to communicate, but that was it. We all had safety gear on, including steel-toe boots, hard hats, safety vests, and gloves. My boss and the safety manager were going towards the top of the building doing their technical work, and they gave us the green light to explore a bit. So Jane and I, along with a few guys, went down to the lower floor to mess around a little, away from the bosses. The place was full of old furniture, tubes, pipes, and other random stuff. It used to be an office building. We were goofing off like typical young people would, having a laugh and messing around. Long story short, one of the guys, Brian, got a bloody nose during some silly roughhousing. Jane and I took him into the bathroom to clean up before we had to report back to our boss upstairs. We shoved a bunch of paper towels up his nose, and we used the sink to rinse him off since the water in the building hadn't been shut off yet. While we were trying to get him sorted, there was a knock on the bathroom door. I shouted out, "Very funny," thinking it was one of my other coworkers playing a prank. I went to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The door was jammed. I began shouting to let us out, thinking that it was my other coworkers still holding us in the bathroom as a prank. I was still tugging on the door when suddenly all the bathroom stall doors slammed shut. It wasn't like a gentle close. Each one slammed so hard they bounced off their stops. The lights went out immediately after that, making it totally pitch black. I don't know who screamed first, but we were all screaming at that point. Brian was cursing like crazy. I started clawing at the door, yelling to let us out. The bathroom had no windows, so it was dark as a cave in there. I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. It was also really cold in the bathroom now too. The most terrifying feeling I've ever felt was when something touched me in the pitch black bathroom. I felt a sticky hand crawling up the back of my hard hat. It wasn't a tap or a brush on my neck. The hand was climbing up slowly and deliberately. I yanked my hard hat off, and it hit the floor with a loud clatter, making the sensation stop. Finally, there was a huge bang as our coworkers from outside were able to get the door open, letting us out of that nightmare. We were all yelling at each other, trying to explain what had happened, but no one was making sense. I was shaking so badly that I could hardly stand. My boss checked the bathroom later, and all he saw was the blood in the sink from the nosebleed, but nothing else. He just gave me my hard hat back, and we all left the building as fast as we could. Once we were out of the building and calmed down a bit, the three of us who were trapped inside the bathroom heard the others' version of the story. They were still walking around just exploring stuff when they thought they saw a figure run across a gap in between two cubicles. Very soon after that, the lights began flickering on and off, and that was when they heard the loud bang on the stall doors coming from the bathroom and heard us start to scream. They were not holding us in as a joke, and they weren't anywhere near the bathroom by the time the three of us inside had started screaming. They eventually were able to pry open the door with a metal pipe, and one of the guys who had pried at the door said he also felt the sensation of a sticky hand slowly going up his arm briefly. Because this happened so recently, I'm still kind of a wreck since it happened, and I'm scared to go to the bathroom alone now, even at home. I always have my dogs come in with me. I don't know what happened in that bathroom, but I don't ever want to be anywhere near that building again, and I'm glad it's going to be demolished soon. This story happened to my cousin and I in 2018. We both love photography and taking long drives listening to music, so that's exactly what we did on this particular day. We drove about an hour north to a small town and found an abandoned barn that was also for sale. At the time, we didn't spot any trespassing signs, so we decided to be adventurous and go check it out. The barn was in semi-decent condition, although the paint had begun to peel off. Structurally, it was pretty sound though, and I didn't feel uneasy about going in. I'm an avid urban explorer and have been in far worse buildings, so we went inside. Once we got inside, we somehow ended up in the basement of this barn. I immediately was getting some weird vibes from the stuff that was in that barn. There was little girls' clothes, toys, and furniture littered throughout the basement of this barn. My cousin and I both thought it was creepy. Behind the barn was a big cornfield that came up right to the back of the barn, so we decided to get some cool photos of the barn with corn stalks in the frame of view. I snapped a few shots of my cousin, and we were ready to head back to the car. Walking through the first row of corn on my way back to my cousin's car, I saw a bone sticking up from out of the dirt. It was a vertebrae bone. At this point, I stopped dead in my tracks in disbelief. I was wondering if it was what I thought it was or if it was an animal bone of some kind. I started looking around and there were several more bones. They were too big to be a deer. I yelled at my cousin, who was almost back to the car, to have her look. We both started examining and digging around the dirt, and we kept finding more and more bones. In college, I took a cadaver lab in human anatomy, so I'm very familiar with the human body. We found a fibula and fully intact femur. That's when I really started to freak out. We decided to call the cops because we knew this was serious. We waited in the car until they arrived. Once the pair of cops arrived, we all started looking through the corn and a nearby trash pile. The cops I don't think believed us, and I distinctly remember them saying they thought it was a deer carcass. That was until I found a full rib cage in the trash pile and showed it to them. The cops told us that they would need to leave and they were calling a full forensic team out to start collecting evidence. We left totally shaken up. On the way out, I did see a no trespassing sign which we missed on the way in. I don't know if the cops saw the no trespassing sign, but if they did, they didn't bring it up at all and didn't care. We gave the cops our information, but we never heard anything more from them. I also watched the news closely for the next few weeks and didn't see anything. I wish I could have got the full story of what happened. It was like an episode of Law and Order, and it was definitely one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. This is something that took place back when I was about 12 years old. During this time, I lived with my parents and siblings in a neighborhood with lots of houses in it. However, not every house looked the same, and there were many different sized yards. I remember that there was this one house a ways down my street that was abandoned. I didn't know the story on it, but I know that one of my friends lived 2 doors down from it. This house had a bigger yard, and there were lots of trees on the property as well. So many, in fact, that you could barely even see the house from the street. It had been abandoned for several years, and I honestly don't know why. I had a few friends that lived in the neighborhood, and I went to school with them and stuff. One evening, I was hanging out with the friend who lived by the abandoned house. His name was Kyler. It was approaching sunset, and I was over in his yard. I don't remember how, but we got to talking about the abandoned house. I was curious about it, because I didn't know anything other than that it was abandoned. Kyler said that we should go over and look at it, so we walked along the sidewalk in front of his house and past the next door neighbors. Then we were standing in front of the abandoned house. There was a gate that was a little bit open and really rusty. The front yard was overgrown with long grass and lots of trees that needed trimming. I remember that Kyler just started walking up in the yard. I followed him, and then he walked past the gate. At that point, I asked him if we were allowed to go back here. He said, "Yeah, the property's abandoned, so who cares?" Then he claimed that he had been in the yard several times before. He started showing me the house and talking about it. We went all the way around it and into the backyard. There, the grass was also overgrown, but there were patches of dirt as well. Then we noticed that a back door to the house was open a little bit. Kyler and I walked over to it. I think that we were both pretty curious as to why the door was open. We both knew 100% that the house was abandoned. Kyler said that the door was not open the last time he was back there. I asked him if he had ever seen the inside of the house before, and he said no. At that point, we both decided to go in. Kyler opened the door just enough for us both to enter. Once we were inside, we saw that all the lights appeared to be off. It was getting dark out now, so the visibility wasn't the greatest. I could tell, though, that there really wasn't much of anything inside the house at all. We were in what was maybe the dining room or living room. I saw a kitchen area to the left. We both walked in farther and saw that there were a few pieces of old furniture here and there, but really not much. I remember seeing a staircase going up, but we walked past it and went towards this hallway. I had a bad feeling about the whole thing, and I didn't really want to be there. To me, we had seen enough and probably should be going. But Kyler continued to walk through the house and went down the hallway into what I think was a bedroom. I remember that I stayed back a little bit. I was still in the hallway when Kyler walked inside of the bedroom. At that point though, I suddenly heard these footsteps. It sounded like somebody was actually upstairs. I listened close and realized that somebody was definitely coming down the staircase. I quickly ran over into the room that Kyler was in. This appeared to be mostly empty as well. I told Kyler that I heard somebody coming down the stairs. At first, he didn't believe me and thought that I was just messing with him. But a moment later, we both heard the footsteps arriving at the bottom of the stairs. I went over and quietly closed the door to the room that we were inside of. We heard the person begin to walk around. The footsteps got slightly closer to us. My heart was beating like crazy, and I was literally sweating. The footsteps did not enter the hallway though. Instead, they headed to the front side of the house. When this happened, Kyler and I knew that we needed to get out of there. We felt that whoever was in there probably heard us, and they were now looking for us. I opened the door, and then we both sprinted out of the hallway into the back door of the house. Luckily, it was still open how we left it. Neither of us bothered to look back where the person had walked. When I was going out the door though, I did hear footsteps approaching, but they were still a distance away. We both left the house, and then fled on foot around the house and back out onto the sidewalk. Then we both went back to Kyler's house. Whoever had been inside of the house did not leave or follow us. After that night, we never went back there again. I'm not sure who was in there. That was one of the scariest moments of my life though. This is something that took place years ago, when I think I was about 19. During this time, I lived with my parents in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I was working only about a mile away from home at a store. It was a part-time job, but I remember that at one point, my car broke down and had to be fixed. I would be without it for a few days, but still had to work. During this time, I walked the mile distance to work, which was really not too bad. It was a little bit different route than I would take while driving though. So the first day that I was walking to work, I remember I passed by this old convenience store in town. The store was now abandoned and had been for several years. I went there a couple of times when I was really young, and seeing it brought back a lot of memories, but I walked right past it to work. However, when I got off work and I was walking home afterwards, I passed by the store again. This time, I was curious and I walked closer. There was a small empty parking lot in front and to the side of the store. The store was very small, and it was basically like a convenience store that you would see with a gas station, except there were never any gas pumps at this one. I walked up to the front and looked inside one of the windows. Inside, the lights were off, but things looked like they hadn't been touched in years. There was still a lot of things inside the store. It was sort of messy and looked really strange to see. It was interesting to me though, and I stood at the window for maybe 5 minutes. As I was looking around, I suddenly saw a man come out from behind one of the aisles inside. This was really strange, because the building was abandoned. The man looked right at me, and I quickly turned and walked away. I kept going down the sidewalk back home. It was really creepy to see a person inside there. The man did not appear to be any kind of construction worker or anything like that. I went the rest of the way back home, and the next day when I walked to work, I went past the store again. But that night, I got off a little bit later than usual. I was walking right by the store again on my way home. This time, I got curious once more, and I stopped to look in the window. It was much darker now with it being nighttime. When I was looking though, once more a man appeared from behind an aisle, this time much quicker than the last time. This guy started walking towards me at the window, and I turned and walked away again. I left the parking lot and then went back onto the sidewalk. Then I crossed a nearby street and went onto another sidewalk. But it was about at that point where I heard footsteps behind me. The sidewalk that I was on was very quiet. and nobody else would ever really walk on it. So this was strange. I turned around and looked, and saw the guy who had been inside of the convenience store. He was walking a pretty long ways back, but appeared to be walking after me. It made me a little bit nervous, but I kept going home. I probably had about 10 minutes left of walking to get there. Most of it was straight, but I would turn several more times. The first turn that I made, I was positive that the guy would keep going straight, but he didn't. He turned with me, and that made me a lot more nervous that he actually was following me. He wasn't really gaining on me at all though, so I started to walk faster. The next turn, I didn't see him for a while after I had made it around, and I actually thought that he was gone. But then I saw him come around the corner and continue to follow me. By this point, I didn't have a whole lot farther to go. I kept walking, and soon my house was in sight. I looked back, and the guy was still there following me. At that point, I made a run for it, and it's probably something that I shouldn't have done. I started sprinting, but at the time that I did, for some reason, I looked behind me. The man also started to sprint. I ran for my house, and luckily it wasn't that far away. I arrived and struggled to unlock the door, but eventually I got it open and went inside. I looked out of the front window and saw the guy now walking down the sidewalk. He did not come into our yard, but stopped and was just kind of standing there on the sidewalk in front. He was not looking at me, and he wasn't even looking at our house, but he was just standing in front of it, looking down the street. Then, after about a minute, I saw him turn around and walk back. I don't know what he was doing. He was probably mad at me for looking inside of the store, but I really didn't mean anything bad by it. I was just curious. After that, I walked a different route to and from work until I got my car back. I'm not sure when it changed, but today, the convenience store is a newer one. This happened back when I was a kid. I think I was maybe 8 or 10 years old. I lived in a neighborhood that had a cul-de-sac on it. There were several kids in the neighborhood that I was friends with, and we would all hang out. So one night, I was with some friends and we were playing several games in the street. We started playing hide and go seek, and we basically had the entire cul-de-sac to ourselves. My friends and I lived in almost every house on the cul-de-sac, except maybe 2 or 3 of them. One house though, the one at the very end, was abandoned. Everybody knew that, but not many people knew why. It was an old house, and I really couldn't remember the last time anybody did live there. So I remember that one of my friends stood in the street and began counting. We all started running away, scattering to find our hiding spots. I remember that I suddenly got this idea to hide behind the abandoned house. I figured nobody lived there, so no one would be mad that I went in their yard, and I also thought that my friend would never think to look there. I felt like I had almost found a loophole in the game and would easily win for sure. So I went onto the property and then into the backyard. Then I crouched down behind one corner of the house. The backyard to this property seemed to go back kind of far. There appeared to be a woods at the end of the yard that went on for who knows how long. Several minutes went by, and I knew that my friend was looking for everyone. I couldn't hear much from where I was, but I did hear a little bit of chatter from some of my friends off in the distance. As time went on, I felt more and more confident that I wouldn't be found and would win the game. I was just waiting to hear them say that everyone had been found except for me. So when I was just sitting behind the house back there, I casually turned around. When I did, I saw this man standing in front of the woods. He was staring right at me. The guy was somewhat big, and I couldn't tell many details about him other than that. It was really dark out. I had no idea who he was, and it really creeped me out. As soon as I saw him, I got up and ran back around the house. I didn't care about hide and seek anymore. After making it around the house and down the driveway, I saw a couple of my friends in the street. They saw me running and then looked behind me. The man had come out around the house and was standing sort of at the side of it. When we all saw him, I think everybody got really freaked out and just scattered. At that point, we all went running back to our houses and then went inside. Everybody knew that that property was abandoned, so seeing a random man walk out from the side of it meant it was time to go inside. After we all went back to our houses, it was already getting late, and we wouldn't be able to stay out for much longer anyways. So none of us went back out, and I was really creeped out by seeing the guy. I really never expected it. However, I didn't tell my parents or anything. That night, I don't remember much else until I went to bed. My bedroom was at the back side of the house, and I had a window out to the backyard. I remember waking up sometime in the middle of the night. The first thing I noticed was that there was a knocking sound from my bedroom window, and that must have been what woke me up. I looked up and saw a man standing there, looking in. He was the same guy that I saw in the backyard of the abandoned house. The guy was just staring at me on the other side of the window. I got up and ran out of my room to my parents' bedroom next door. I started banging on their door like crazy until they got up. When we returned to my bedroom, the man was gone. I remember that my dad went outside and looked around the property, but he couldn't find him. After coming back inside, my parents called the police. They arrived several minutes later, and I don't really remember much after that, but I know that the next day, I told one of my friends about it. She said that she also saw a man at her window the previous night. He went away pretty quickly though. This guy must have went to at least 2 of our houses. After that though, nobody in our neighborhood saw him again. It still gives me the creeps to think about it to this day. Back when I was a teenager, my best friend's name was Jake, and we went to school together. We also lived in the same general area. I think when I was 16, I was over at Jake's house hanging out one day. We were in his basement playing video games, and I remember that his other friend stopped by. It was a kid named Parker who didn't go to our school, but lived just down the street from Jake. I didn't really know Parker, but the 3 of us hung out in Jake's basement for a while. Then Parker said that he was going to this abandoned mall that was nearby and wanted to know if we would come with. I kind of knew about the mall because I had lived in the city for my whole life. It was on the other side of town from my house, but pretty close to Jake's, and it was a very old mall. I had actually been to the mall several times with my parents when I was a young child, but the place closed in the early 2000s. So Jake really wanted to go see the mall. I, on the other hand, hadn't really planned to. Abandoned places didn't really seem that interesting to me. But I had nothing else going on, so I said sure. Parker, Jake, and I then left Jake's house and walked down the sidewalk to the end of his street. Then we walked a few more blocks and crossed a walking bridge that went over a highway. There, a little past a woods, it led to the rear parking lot of the mall. I didn't realize how close it was to Jake's house. It had only took about 10 minutes to walk there. It was pretty interesting to see the mall now. It was still standing, but certainly looked abandoned. The parking lot had lots of grass and weeds growing through the many obvious cracks. The pavement of the parking lot was a very light gray color, and the paint from the parking spaces was so worn it was nearly invisible. I'm honestly not sure why they never tore the mall down or did anything with the property. So we started to walk closer, and then there was this one door that didn't have a handle on it but was open just a crack. I didn't really want to go inside, and I didn't think that Parker or Jake had any intentions of going inside. But apparently they did, because they all walked over to the door, and Parker swung it open and we all entered. The door had been held open by a beer bottle. I asked right away if Parker had ever been inside the mall before, and he claimed that he had. The lights were all off, so we needed to use our flashlights on our phones to see, although it was not completely dark because the mall had some natural light from the ceiling in most of the walkways. When we entered the mall, we were in what appeared to be a former store. It was completely empty other than just some carpet, and we then walked out into one of the main mall walkways. Now that was pretty cool. Although basically everything was gone, there were still some signs and remnants of signs. A few old advertisements and designs were still there as well, like how the walls were painted. It felt like I was going back in a time machine at least 10 years ago. We explored a bit, and then walked around to another hallway which was much darker. The whole time I was sort of on edge. We were in this quieter hallway, and I heard the sound of footsteps way farther down. We all stopped and listened. At that point, the footsteps stopped as well. We shined our lights but couldn't see down that far. So at that point, we were creeped out enough and turned back. But we did not leave. Instead, we just went down another hallway. As we walked down there, a while later, we heard footsteps off in the distance again, this time behind us. It seemed like somebody was inside the mall. I had no idea who could possibly be in the mall that was clearly abandoned. I remember that Parker actually called out. He shouted, asking if anybody was there, and said that we were simply lost and would leave if we weren't supposed to be there. I thought maybe it was a security guard or police at that point, but nobody responded. It was just silence. I suggested we leave, and we turned to another hallway. Parker said that he knew another way that led back to where we had come in, so we walked down a few more walkways. I honestly had no clue where we were anymore. It was really dark basically the whole time. Then, out of nowhere, we heard footsteps behind us again. This time, they were much louder and closer than before, and they were heading towards us. The three of us just took off running. Nobody bothered to look back and see who it was, but we all just ran. When we did, I heard the footsteps start to run after us. We sprinted for at least a minute, and finally I saw the main hallway near where we had come in. We kept running all the way until we got to the store that we entered through. Then we went into it and found the door leading out to the parking lot. After running through the parking lot and off the property, we finally stopped to catch our breath. Whoever was inside did not leave the mall. We then walked all the way back to Jake's house again. I went home a short time later. None of us knew who was inside that mall, if it was just another explorer or what, but I'm guessing it was probably a homeless guy or maybe somebody who was there to do drugs or something. Perhaps they were just trying to scare us. Either way, it certainly did get us scared, and we never went back to that mall. I've been hiking for a few years now, and one evening I went hiking on a trail I've done before, which I considered my favorite. It's well known for its beautiful views, and I had planned on a simple evening hike. I wasn't expecting it to take too long, so I didn't bring much, just water, a few snacks, and my phone. As the evening went on, the weather turned cooler. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, and I knew it would be getting dark soon. I had planned to stick to the main path, but I decided to take a shortcut that would get me back to the car a little faster. I'd done it before without issue. This time, though, the shortcut led me into unfamiliar terrain. The woods were denser here, daylight was fading quickly, and I had to have made a wrong turn or missed a turn at some point. At first, I didn't panic because I thought I could still find my way, but as I kept walking, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The path was barely a trail now, just some faint markings in the dirt that I could barely follow. My phone had no signal, and when I tried calling for help, it just showed that dreaded no service message. It was already getting darker, and I wasn't sure where I was anymore. Right as it was getting dark, I saw an old shack up ahead of me. It looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in years, but it also didn't look like it had fallen apart. The door was slightly open, and nobody was inside, so I decided to go in. It seemed like a strange thing to find out here, but at that point, I didn't have many options. I figured I could use it for shelter for the night until morning when I could see the woods better. The shack was small, with old wooden walls. There was some broken furniture, a dusty table, and a few old crates scattered around on the carpet that covered the ground. It wasn't much, but it was better than sitting outside in the dark. I locked the door behind me and settled into the corner with my bag as a pillow, lying on top of the carpet so that I had at least a little padding. Around midnight, I began hearing noises. It was faint, but there were noises now and then coming from below the shack. At first, I thought an animal had made its home under the shack, but as the night went on, I heard a lot of different noises, some louder scrapes, or just overall rustling around. I was confused, but tried to ignore the faint noises as I drifted in and out of sleep throughout the night. It all came together for me when suddenly I heard loud steps ascending towards me in the middle of the night. There was a lower level below me, like a bunker in the ground. As the steps worked their way towards me, I felt a slight push below. I realized I was laying right over the entrance to down below, which must have been a trap door below the carpet that I was laying on. I shouted out hello, kind of out of instinct, and didn't know what else to do. Whoever was below me trying to open the door frantically ran back down the stairs. A few moments later, I heard someone scrambling away into the woods, making a lot of noise as they went. I was a little worried that the person might come back, but I wasn't going to find the trail in the middle of the night, so I stayed. I spent the rest of the night huddled up in the shack, hoping that the morning would come soon. In the morning, before I left the shack, I tried to open the trap door below the carpet, but it was locked, and I couldn't find any other entrance to the bunker below me. There had to be another entrance because whoever was down there had taken off into the woods earlier that night from a different exit, but it was well hidden because I didn't see it. I made my way back to the hiking trail easily. It was easier to figure out where I was going in the daylight, and after a few hours, I was back at the parking lot. I immediately reported what I had found to the authorities, but when they asked for the details on the location, I couldn't give them an exact spot. The area was so far off the main trail, and I didn't really know where it was. I don't know if the authorities ever even looked for the shack and bunker, or if they ever found it. Maybe they didn't take me seriously, or figured it was nothing to worry about. To this day, though, I question myself why someone needed a hidden bunker below an old wooden shack in the middle of the woods for. It must have been some sort of extreme doomsday prep type of person, or someone who was up to no good.